last month you were at FIU and you presented a check for $650,000 to help small businesses at FIU. But you voted against the bill that gave the money that you then signed a check for and handed and had a photo op, the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, right? You voted against that bill.
Right now, you have to give me more details, but I do know that every time I have an opportunity to bring money to my constituents, I do so. I just did $400,000. But look,
but you voted against the Chips and Science Act, right?
Listen, right now I need to ask my staff. But what do we look at the $40 million that I have brought to this community? Aren't you proud of me? Aren't you proud of the $40 million that I brought? But how much? Aren't you proud that I wrote the Dignity Act? Haven't I? Let's talk about the Americas Act.
Wait a second. Let me 1 second.
Tell me.
The money that you talk about, the $40 million that you bring back to the district, sometimes that money comes from bills that you voted against. You voted against the CHIPS Act, and yet you praise the fact that the South Florida Climate Resilience Tech Hub is going to be started in Miami, right? You voted against the infrastructure bill, and you talk about all the money that comes back to the airport. So at the same time that you're taking credit for the money that you bring back to the district, in Washington, you're voting against these projects on party line votes.
Listen, that was, I think, last cycle. I cannot really remember right now, but let's look at the Americas Act, which is what I'm going to, which is what I would like.
You don't want to explain why you vote
really
against things?
I mean, right now, and I'm not trying to be a politician, there's so many bills that I've introduced that I know that many of them
these are bills that you voted against.
That I understand. But it's okay. Sometimes I vote and sometimes I don't. But let's look at the positive.
This is CBS Miami's Jim DeFede putting on full display the blatant hypocrisy of someone like Republican lawmaker Maria Salazar, who votes against legislation that would allocate funding to her own district, and when that legislation inevitably passes thanks to the Democrats, she not only has the audacity to applaud it, but she signs her name on the checks doling it out. Doling out money that, had she gotten her way, wouldn't even be there. Shameless would be the understatement of the year. Notice how, immediately after being told that she voted against the funding, Salazar literally says, "Whenever I have the opportunity to bring money to my constituents, I do so." But again, no, she literally does not, because again, she voted against the funding that she's now taking credit for bringing. You can't have it both ways. You don't get to vote against money and then throw yourself a parade congratulating yourself for securing funding once it passes in spite of you. That's not how basic logic works. Maybe Republican logic, but not basic logic. Notice too how she tries to diffuse responsibility by claiming that that was last cycle. Who can really be held accountable for what they did in a totally different cycle, which, to be clear, was last year? I mean, let's just look at this with some common sense. Clearly, Republicans like Maria Salazar can see the virtue in delivering money and infrastructure and jobs to their constituents. Clearly, they can see that it's good politics. Clearly, they can see that it's good governance. If all of that is true, and if the bill is so good that she would be falling over herself to take credit for its effects, then why not just vote for it? And the answer, unfortunately, is simple. It is more important for these Republicans to try and hurt Democrats than it is to help their own constituents. They know that if this bill passes, Americans will derive a benefit, and that may just reflect well on the party in power. And so their sole priority is to make sure that Democrats don't score any wins, even if those wins benefit their own districts. Because as far as the GOP is concerned, it's not about helping people, it is about hurting the opposition by any means necessary. And this shtick has become so obvious that even Joe Biden has begun calling them out.
Even my Republican friends in Congress, not a single one of them voted for the rescue plan. I'm not going to embarrass anyone, but I have here a list of how back in their districts they're bragging about the rescue plan. They touted the restaurant revitalization fund. They touted the fact that we're in a situation where they're dealing with touted grants to community health care centers. Touted, I mean, some people have no shame. But I'm happy. I'm happy they know that it benefited their constituents. That's okay with me. But if you're going to try to take credit for what you've done, don't get in the way of what we still need to do. The bottom line is this. The Biden economic plan is working. Every single Republican, House and Senate, every single one, Every Republican in the House, every Republican in the Senate, they voted against it. Every one. Look, hear this, America. Every single Republican voted against lowering prescription drug costs. Every one. Every one. Against lowering health care costs. Every one. Against tackling the climate crisis. Every one. Against lower energy costs. Against creating good-paying jobs. Against a fair tax system. Every single one. Now every single American needs to return the favor and vote them out of office. By the way, just by dealing with allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices, it means Medicare doesn't have to pay out that many tax dollars to buy them. That alone is going to reduce over time $300 billion in the deficit. You would think that Republicans really cared about reducing inflation, they'd vote for the Inflation Reduction Act. But every single Republican in the House and Senate voted against it. Every single Republican in the House and Senate. Now, I admit some of them voted against it. They thought it made sense, but they couldn't let Biden, quote, have a victory. It's not my victory. It's the American people's victory.
And I know you're probably asking yourself, how could they be so shameless? And the answer is that Republicans know that their media exists in a closed-loop ecosystem, where they can tell whatever lies or distortions they want without having to worry about being called out. Except, of course, in the rare instance where a Republican speaks with a real journalist and is actually faced with a follow-up question from someone who is not a rabid Republican sycophant. And what we're left with is the disaster that was Maria Salazar sitting down with Jim DeFede. But as far as this legislation is concerned, time and time again, Republicans are proving that they know these are good policies, which is ostensibly why they're trying to take credit for them, while simultaneously trying to prevent them from happening in the first place because they would rather hurt Americans if it meant depriving Democrats of a perceived win. I mean, think about that for a second. These Democratic policies are so popular that Republicans are falling over themselves to tout those accomplishments themselves. But they also did everything they could to ensure that it never came to pass. So every time a Republican touts funding for waterways or bridges or roads or ecosystem restoration or flood prevention or rural broadband or clean energy manufacturing, those Republicans wanted those issues to persist. And only after Democrats secured funding did the rest of that party show up at the receiving line to accept the praise and congratulations. Again, if these people were capable of shame, they would have a hard time showing their faces in public. Ultimately, it comes down to this. Republicans don't want government to work, and so they try on a daily basis to break it. They create insurmountable hurdles and manufactured crises, like, for example, how they required the USPS to create a $72 billion fund to pay for the cost of its post-retirement healthcare costs, 75 years into the future, a burden that applies to no other federal agency or even private corporation. But they wanted to create the illusion of a failing agency so that they could ultimately privatize it. The same with Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. They wanted those programs, which, by the way, we've all been paying into our entire lives, to be privatized. And so the same predatory healthcare system that's been screwing over patients in this country for decades, for centuries, would be replicated to cover entitlement programs. Because when it comes to Republicans, a program shouldn't exist unless some CEO is making hundreds of millions of dollars offering some scant service to people at its highest margins possible. God forbid we actually help people in this country without first lining someone else's pockets. So look, Biden can shame these Republicans until the sun goes down. Journalists can shame these Republicans until the sun goes down. I can shame these Republicans until the sun goes down. But at the end of the day, even though they themselves admit that Democratic policies are good enough to claim credit for, Republicans will continue to oppose everything they can because their priority isn't fixing anything, it's breaking it. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to the channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on this screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.